Good morning, good morning, good morning. So good to see so many of you here while we're getting started first thing in the morning. I know that traffic, as usual, this is LA, has been wonderful this morning. You're in for a treat today. We're going to be speaking about the immersive media and social entrepreneurship. I'm Dr. Jerry Lynn Hogg. I'm the director of the Media Psychology program at Fielding Graduate University. And another reason why I'm passionate about this particular panel is that I'm past president of the American Psychological Association for Media Psychology and Technology. My initiative that year was Technology for Good, and I think you're going to see a lot of great uses today on the panel. So, like I said, you're in for a real treat. We have a great panel of experts, and they'll be sharing their projects that they're working on right now. And I think they'll provoke you to start thinking of media technology in a new way, particularly augmented and virtual reality and other immersive technologies. I expect that during the discussion we might get a little heated or controversial, so make sure you have your questions ready for us, because we are going to push the envelope. And let me just get started with all the different panel members that we have with us today. On the end, we have Jimmy Gilberte. As he explained to me, he came over to the dark side. He started out with his background in post-production, but now is in sales and business development. We'll start with him, so I'm not going to tell you too much in advance, but he really is looking at that idea of using VR and having it be a very active, engaged, collaborative space. So next to Jimmy is Linda Durnell. She's a veteran in the tech industry, and her most recent research is focused on VR and human behavior. She teaches the psychology of technology, and today she's going to talk about that research that she's doing in VR and human behavior. Next to Linda, we have Laurie Kozlowski. Did I say that right, Laurie? Yes. Oh, really? Or close enough? Okay, thank you. She's a producer and editorial director of Project Empathy, which is a VR experience about the U.S. prison system. So she's going to talk a little bit about that Project Empathy and why it was created. Next to Laurie, we have Josephine Muniz. She's the CMO of Candy Labs AR, and that looks at location-based AR. So not only is she going to be talking about Candyland, but I think we're going to have a special reveal of some of the things that you're doing right now that is getting in there using technology for good, and particularly augmented reality. So really excited about that. And then finally, Gary Hare. He's faculty at Fielding Graduate University in the Media Psychology program. But you know, he's got an incredibly long business background. You can see that in the bios that are included, including starting 6 companies and groundbreaking technology in video technology. He's going to be talking about that emotional impact of real-time video and information, particularly along the lines of advocacy, from big data impact on social and political advocacy to using augmented reality on media cognition in location-based information. So let's turn it over to Jimmy to get started. Thank you.
Thanks. So one of the things that I wanted to go and talk about is the issue with VR a lot of times is that it's a solo experience. It's something that you go in, you put on the headset like this, and you're in there, and you tend to be in by yourself. And one of the things that the company that I have been working with, WorldViz, has been doing for the last 10, 15 years is doing things such as enterprise VR. It's been used in medical, be able to look at architectural things before anything is built. You can go and visualize it. But what I wanted to highlight here is the fact that VR isn't always just HMDs. It can be a cave. You can get 5, 10 people in a VR experience. And I'll show you. So in this case, you might have something which short throw projectors to go and make it so that you're not casting a shadow on the screens themselves, but you're participating all at one time with one person guiding you through the experience. That is a social interaction where you're in a VR space and you see the person next to you and you can see their expression. There's something interesting about that. If I was using this for real estate, it's nice to be able to say, oh, this is a great house. What do you think husband, wife, kids, etc., and you can see the expression on their faces. So there's a collaborative social side of VR there. The experience that we've been using with the Solo has been something like an Oculus, which I have up here, or a Vive, or in the case, what we've done is we've been able to do something as large as this room. We could go and light up sensors across this whole room and do walking VR in this entire space. And that's great for if you're doing studies of what is it like to walk down a shopping center and looking at things on shelves, or just being able to do first responder. We've talked about first responder type stuff, where you have to practice running out of a room, down the hallway, into a safe room, and hide. In a Vive or an Oculus, you can't do that, and we've had technologies that lets us do that. But again, we're thinking about collaborative, social. And one of the things that I wanted to go and point out is, let's see. Here's an example of what we had been doing with two people, same space, and what you're seeing is they're in that same virtual space, but they're in the same room, and the technology was pretty nice to be able to go and do that. We could get up to 4 people. They're all interacting. What they're doing in this one is this person is showing someone how to go and take apart this helicopter rotor. $1 million part, and you're able to go and train someone on how to go and do this. And that's kind of neat. But you're in the same room, and so there's a limit to the way that you're interacting. Yes?
You can see out the goggles as well as the image?
Depends on the one. No, in this case, and this is where that hazard, that's where having the cave is nice, because you can see the person and be in a 3D-ish type environment. And here, the beauty is you're immersed. And I'm going to go into, this is something that's interesting for me. I'm now taking this on the road. What I'm about to go and show you is me being able to be collaborative with somebody else in VR, disparate distance. In this case, I'm over just across the border in New York in Danbury, Connecticut, which is where I live on that coast, and I'm talking with somebody in Santa Barbara. In fact, I'm going to go over to that now, and this is what we're able to go and see. So through a PowerPoint type deck, so I'll show you what created this. In this case, I've got a solution. Well, that's interesting. Let me go and shut off PowerPoint here. PowerPoint loves to steal the, loves to go and steal the, okay. Now we come back here, got it. So PowerPoint style thing, slide, slide, slide. I drag in the objects that I want to see in VR, and I can then experience it and show it with somebody. So in this case, let me go and show you that I'm connected with somebody in Santa Barbara right now. So let me know if this is, so if when I'm in, everything is working fine. Hopefully I won't be that driver going down the mountain pass and making everybody sick. But there's Gabe. Hey, Gabe. And so what we've done is, as I look around here, this came out as just something out of, say, 3D Studio Max or Revit or things. What Gabe is doing is he's pointing to different objects. I can go and leave him, messages. I can write, on the walls, etc. What we're doing is right now we've got an audio thing that I can't project it to the screen. Oh. Hazard. Okay, so this is the thing about being able to see out, as the person in the audience said. I can't, which means and I'm Italian, so I talk with my hands, so Linda's got to be careful. Now, the thing that I've been noticing, and the thing about social, so we're talking, so if Gabe and I were talking with each other, I would be talking with him as if he is that distance to me. Think about how many times you've been in a Starbucks and you hear somebody yabbering on the phone, blah, 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 because they're on one coast or the other and they think they have to yell across the continent. In this case, I'm right here, and I've talked to somebody outside this, and what's interesting is I ask, was that, kind of nasty? Was I being rude? And they're saying, no, you're quiet. You're just like talking to yourself. And the only thing that I have to be careful about when I'm doing this in the Starbucks is for my gear. In other words, when I'm in, that means I'm not watching my gear. That's kind of the only real hazard that I have. Now, the other thing that gets freaky is if I'm talking with somebody and there's something happening behind me, when I turn around and I'm facing the person drinking coffee behind and I'm talking at them, and not knowing I'm talking with them, there's a hazard to that. But that's the idea from a social network or a social point of view with VR, is we're getting to. I'm going to say thank you to Gabe and say bye, see you, and put this down. What this does is this is something that's now getting to the point where it's cloud-based. I could be on an Oculus, you could be on a Vive, or you could be on some other gear, and I'll be able to go and say, I want to show you this new product that I'm working on. And you could collaboratively work together on it. Or you could have a conference call where, in fact, when you think about it, conference calls where I'm on GoToMeeting or I'm on just a regular conference call, I could be doing 3 or 4 things at once. And you're getting half that person's attention when you're on VR. When you're in a space like this and you see that person, you know if their face is drifting, if they're doing, you could wave at them and say, no, 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 look at this. There's a one-to-one. This is the thing that VR brings to this, is that there's an immediacy, and you are the 2 people in that world, or 3 or 4 people, but you're there together, and the world goes away. Yes?
How is that different than just video teleconferencing?
The video conferencing, you could see the other person, you can see them look away. The thing is that I can't manipulate something. What I can go in here and do is I can bring in an object like a John Deere tractor, and I could go and show you, here's how you get into this particular section of the motor. So that training, that one-to-one.
Digital content.
That's right.
Yeah. So what we're going to try to do is hold the questions until we get through the panel, but I do think we really want to be able to find out about how that works.
Yeah, so we'll go through that. So
yeah.
As the panel goes through, what will happen is each of us are going to have different areas that touch on different parts of either social network or social interaction and things along those lines. And when it comes to the questions and answer, I'll try to explain it visually if I can when we get to it.
Great.
So next we have Linda Durnell, but Linda, we need to get the technology switched over to this one. So in the meantime, I just wanted to say I'm really fascinated with the idea of moving into a more social VR. A lot of us were questioning it for quite some time, whether that would be possible. But I believe that we really are moving to a place where the lines are blurred and that we're not actually looking at the specific technology. At a point, we won't be saying, you know, VR, AR, MR, or RL, you know, real life. So thanks, Jimmy. So now Linda Durnell.
Okay, next. Thanks. So I'm just going to give a real brief overview of VR and advocacy media as it relates to behavioral change, and then we can talk more later in depth with the panel as we go through it. I'm going to start with VR, and as we know, most of us know that this is not a new delivery mechanism. This is a fundamentally different experience that we've never experienced before. And the questions that come up a lot when I speak about it is, can we trust this new technology? And really, how does it affect human behavior? Let's look at a couple examples. One of them in a VR experience is perspective taking. And there's a great deal of psychological research that's investigated the influence of concern for another. When a person can feel another perspective and adopt it in a virtual environment, feelings of empathy, helping behavior can increase, and an attitude or behavioral change can occur. How many people here have had an emotional experience in VR? Just a few? Well, yeah, if you have, I mean, VR has the ability to mount like a brute force attack on your emotions. There's just no ways about it. And there's been times I've had to be very, very careful going into certain environments because I know the emotionality of it would be not very good for me. So I have to be very, very careful. But what we've found that once an emotional decision is made, it is difficult for an individual, for any of us, to change our trajectory. So when decisions are being made, emotion can assign a subjective value, and they have the appearance, these emotions, as being more important. So any functional view of emotion pretty much has to allow for the possibility that emotion and rational thought can work at cross purposes. So there is innovations, a lot of innovations in some profound behavioral change. Go ahead. I put this up because just this last weekend I presented my research at a Stanford symposium, and the interesting thing about this, if you notice, it was part of the medical department at Stanford. And they were looking at VR and behavioral change, and I was able to look at some of the most cutting-edge research, clinical research that they've done, and it was absolutely fascinating what they're using VR for, and very, very promising results in pain management, in phobias, treatment. We've all heard about PTSD, but treatment in schizophrenia. In fact, there's a company called Surgical Theater that uses VR headsets to let surgeons go inside a patient's brain and pre-surgery, and they look around and they'll look at maybe like a brain tumor, and they'll say, what is it, what are the complications that we might encounter once we go in, and they can kind of do like almost a pre-surgery plan almost and stuff, and spot potential complications, that kind of thing, and mentally, more importantly, mentally prepare for the operation well before they do it. So there's those types of things that are happening. Okay. So I'm going to switch tracks here a little bit and go into what is advocacy media. And media advocacy can be understood as the strategic use of media to support efforts to advance social change. Mm-hmm. A lot of it's been done in being used VR in advocacy for documentary films. We know of Noni de la Peña, Chris Milk. My research was on Clouds Over Sidra, which was the UN experience of a 12-year-old girl in a Syrian refugee camp, and her experience. They're just coming out more and more often. In fact, Laurie's going to be talking about one that she did as well, so I'm not going to go too much in depth with that. But then you've got CNN VR, and VR can improve the impact for storytelling, for getting your message heard. But what's interesting too is there's a research findings from last summer that I wanted just to kind of go over, because I think it's really interesting, especially in light of the political theater that we're all experiencing recently. And one of the findings was one, that knowledge is less important than how one feels about an issue. 2, caring about an issue is more important than being educated about an issue. 3, how you frame the issue affects people's willingness to act. Then the more people are telling stories, the more likely people are to act. It's a cumulative effect, which creates a type of tipping point that remains changed for 6 to 9 months. And the last one is the notion of acclamation, which is a significant uptake to receptivity when people are validated before they see content that is against their values. Now, I'm not endorsing these things. I'm just saying these are the findings that they're finding with people, which I think is interesting when you're creating content, especially in a VR experience, understanding what kind of power it may have and the type of behavioral change that you're likely to get. So in VR too, there's a lot of solutions, and we're finding more and more interactive, like Jimmy was talking about. But social media as an advocacy tool, can very well mitigate suffering. For example, Twitter is used most often for breaking news, and as we saw after the Las Vegas shooting, social media was used for people to find places to donate blood and support services. And you'll see a lot more of that, I think, going forward. And Martin Seligman, who is very big in the research in the positive psychology movement, suggests that helplessness prolongs suffering and depression. So understanding the tools that we have here, perhaps we can help with that, and and mitigate a little bit of the helplessness that some people feel in crisis. Yep. So I'm going to go wrap it up with this, one of my favorite quotes, and my ode to him. But 10 years ago, we didn't have smartphones, we didn't have social media, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have map apps, we didn't have robots. It was a really different world just like a blink ago, 10 years ago. And we certainly could not fly around and look at somebody's tumor in their head before they operate. So things are very, very different now. So I want to leave you with this one exercise. And if you ask yourself, if I had the power to change the reality on the planet, one, what would it be? What aspect troubles you the most? And what tools would you use to create this change? Because we have the tools now, and I think it's time that we get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and good information to think about. As the technology continues to get better, we're dealing with pixel rate and pixelation, frame rate, all of those kinds of things. But we still are uncovering what is the impact on the human behavior and how we can harness that for good. So thank you. Next, we have Laurie and Kozowski, and she's going to be talking about her Project Empathy project.
We're just starting with this trailer, which will give you a broad overview.
Prison is an upside down kingdom. It's a second by second attack on the soul. I capture life. I capture moments. Can anything good come out of reality? Come and see. There's not one person I can say that they are the same person they are today that they were when they were 16 years old.
For the first time in history, the sitting president visits a federal prison.
The horrors that some teenagers are facing as they're locked up in adult prison.
Kind of like a locker, one size doesn't fit all.
$168,000 a year warehousing people who have an 80% chance of going back to prison.
Once we're done with these prisoners, they're like human boomerangs. They're broken right in the middle and they keep coming back.
I think that there is actually a lot of room for sort of healthy change here.
I'm a father, average cheesecake lover, and I'm also formerly incarcerated.
I was identified as a number for 25 years.
She didn't give birth to me when it's out.
I left him when he was a baby.
Our daughter does not have a father to help her ride a bike.
What did she need to feel in order to maybe find another path at a younger age?
Love.
Can anything good come out of Galilee? Come and see. When you come and see, come inside the prison.
Thanks for showing that. So that was the trailer or sizzle for what originally we were calling Day of Empathy and rebranded to Project Empathy, simply because originally the idea was to kind of one day after we had created all the VR content to storm DC and all these Congress people and show them VR and make them understand. And we recognized that, human rights violations and social justice doesn't happen in a day, and certainly something to change something like mass incarceration was going to take time, and so hence the name Project Empathy. So to give you a broad overview, Project Empathy is a four-part VR series about the U.S. prison system. More widely about social justice issues, but we started out looking at mass incarceration. It was a concept created by the woman you saw in the video, Jamie Wong, and CNN commentator Van Jones. The project was funded by Google, and we spent a year and a half. I was responsible for producing research and reporting and the 360 sort of script writing. We pulled in different directors from Hollywood who already had quite a resume when it came to linear storytelling, but very few had done VR before. We did work with Nani de la Pena, a well-known VR pioneer, on one of the pieces. And I think the challenge, I was saying to someone earlier, was to kind of choose what stories are you going to tell people about mass incarceration, because there are so many different stories to tell. To kind of explain the trailer a little more, now having some distance from it, I can see how you don't see that backstory. But in the research, I had found these two gentlemen who had both been to prison. I found them through a Carnegie Hall program, which is a partner of ours. Carnegie Hall has a music rehabilitation program that helps men and women who have been to prison to rehabilitate and come back into society through music education. And they were incredibly, incredibly compassionate and helpful. And that's how I found Johnny, and I started to interview him about his story. He went to maximum security prisons in New York for 16 years for armed robbery. And the gentleman you saw taking photographs, Juan Roldan, went to maximum security prisons in New York for 25 years for second-degree murder. And so even my own perspectives changed as I was getting on the phone with these folks, interviewing them, and figuring out how to best tell their stories. And I think what came to light was within any social impact issue, there's just so many different facets. These guys are both, they've served their time and they're out of prison now, but the effects that linger and, the difficulty in finding a job, trying to piece a family back together. And I think the challenge of Project Empathy is we were trying to tell all of those stories. In VR, we had to choose, I don't want to equate it too much because we certainly aren't, we didn't come at this like Shawshank Redemption, which is a made-up film, but ultimately, if you think about that film, if you've seen it, the director had to choose what do you show and what do you leave to the imagination, and we were challenged with the same thing, except in a 360 experience. Two of the pieces that were made first, the first one was shot in Detroit, in a 360, we created a 360 environment to show someone's experience in solitary confinement. And the second piece was shot here in Los Angeles in North Hollywood. And that director, Wendy Calhoun, was an executive producer of Empire, the TV show. So of course she came at as a TV show and hired actors, and we really recreated a scene so that when you went into the 360 experience, you were supposed to be an 8-year-old girl watching your mother get arrested, which is entirely common. And I think what we ended up choosing, only getting four stories to tell, was what are the most common experiences and what kind of impacts the reason that prisons work the way they do in the United States the most. And I certainly learned so much about 360 storytelling and the challenges that a lot of directors face in terms of how to pull something like this off. And to speak to what Linda was saying, the true impact when you put it on an audience member, what they think or feel about what they saw. We debuted content at the Democratic National Convention last year, and we also debuted content with The Atlantic at their Race and Justice Summit. And it certainly opened up a lot of conversation about different approaches to problem solving at very least. And at very most, we did see emotional reaction from people who were sort of in these VR pop-ups in the headset. But to speak to what you were saying earlier, I think what we would have loved to have is a more social experience where people can watch this content together and start to have some dialogue about how we solve these issues. Because I think the biggest thing that I learned is that these things don't get solved overnight, even if someone does have an emotional reaction. And then the question is, as soon as you do have the emotional reaction, what are you going to do about it, and what are you willing to do about it? So.
Thank you, Laurie. Powerful. And now moving from VR into AR, but still looking at those stories and connecting with people. We have Josephine Muniz, and you can go ahead and start, and I'll find the video for you.
So I'm kind of a wild card on the panel because I work for a technology company called Candy Lab AR. We own our own tech. I work for a company called Candy Lab AR. We own our own augmented reality technology. And I know that when people think location-based augmented reality, they immediately start thinking about Pokemon Go. And so I'm here to really kind of show that there can be some gamification when it comes to location-based augmented reality, but we should think of other user experiences that we can create for social change. So an example that I can give is, we have the fires going on in Northern California right now, even in Tustin, close to where I live. And when you think about, what experience can I create? An example that we've done and that we've given to kind of the LA government is really kind of creating an app that allows people people to find locations of where they can go when something happens, like an earthquake, that really directs people from place to place so that they know where they go for healthcare, where they go to collect water, where certain shelter is that they can go to if their house is going to be on fire, things like that. So those are the examples of use cases that are possible with location-based augmented reality. We don't have to think gamification. We can create that gamified experience because then there is that social exchange that's going on with people. But when you think about social change with location-based AR, what happens is you have people communicating with each other. They can communicate with each other through this app that's created. They can help each other and they can guide each other. Right now, oh, do you guys think I'll get something?
Yeah, I'm having problems with the URL. If you want to come over.
Oh,
and do
yeah,
that.
sure. Sorry.
There we go. Awesome.
Okay. So what we're showing, and we don't have to show the video.
Just the.
Yeah, so we are launching a new game with Univision called Unitaria. The reason that I wanted to bring this up during this panel is because this game is launching in Texas first, and we all know what happened in Houston. And there was a discussion between Candy Lab and the Univision team in terms of what we do with Houston, because this game is really kind of like a Pokemon Go game for adults. Unitaria is kind of Loteria with a twist. It's a card game, and Univision is really using their talent as the cards that people have to go around town collecting. What they're doing is they're working with sponsors who are offering items as prizes as well as coupons and discounts. And with Houston, the discussion really was, do we really want this app to go live in Houston, knowing what happened? And the decision was yes. And it really is because of that human behavior. We thought, yes, let's launch this game because we want people to feel good about what's going on in their city. They just went through a tough time. And part of the game, too, is really going to help. Some of the sponsors and clients are going to offer things to people in Houston who might need kind of, some people lost their homes. I know that there's a sponsor who's offering a car, for those people who might have lost their cars. So these are different ways that we can think about location-based augmented reality and how we can support a community. It can be gamified, it can be non-gamified. Once you have the technology, you really can build whatever experience you want to build. And really just think about location-based in terms of guiding people to collect items, guiding people to get more information, but really using that augmented reality technology to create a different kind of experience. Yes.
Thank you. And now, Dr. Gary Hare.
Thanks, Jerry Lynn. I'll do my key takeaway first. That way you don't have to worry about taking notes. Foundations and NGOs spend almost 5 times more money per year on product and project innovation than venture capitalists do. Period. Now I'll start with my actual presentation. You may have seen in your local paper about 8 or 9 days ago a research report. It's very unusual to have a research report above the fold in the LA Times, the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, out of Stanford and Berkeley. And basically what they did was they went back and did in-depth research on 41 political campaigns, trying to answer the question, how do you change somebody's mind? How do you move somebody from undecided to decided in any category? And what they found was fascinating. In one campaign, the AFL-CIO knocked on 300,000 doors. They were very proud of that. We knocked on 300,000 doors. We had our people all over the place knocking on doors, and we knocked on 300,000 of them. And not only that, we put flyers on each door. We put 300,000 flyers where we went. And you go, well, that's cool. What was the impact? They actually talked to 120 people out of 300,000 and changed 4 people's minds. Millions and millions and millions of dollars are spent in television advertising during the last 10 days of any campaign and election cycle. What is the impact of that money? And the answer is that the media buyers and political consultants get paid rather well. Other than that, there is no impact whatever. The third way people spend a great deal of money in political and cause campaigning is voter registration. Does it have an impact on the outcome of a cause when you have a voter registration drive? And the answer is, well, the cost is about $40 for each person you register. By and large, it does not in any way move the outcome of the election. So then you ask yourself the question, what in the world works? I mean, if all this stuff we've been doing forever doesn't actually work, what works when it comes to political causes and political candidates? That's what I'd like to show you a little bit about this morning. The Obama campaign in 2008 was convinced that they had to win Ohio. Now, as it turns out, they didn't, but at the time, they were convinced in their campaign that they absolutely had to win Ohio. And so what they did was they did in-depth interviews. This was the first time this had been done, and they identified 30 some odd issues that motivate different voters. So some voters might be interested in Social Security or healthcare or jobs or innovation or whatever. And so they wanted to know that, and their campaign war room was about the size of this room, completely covered with butcher paper, with different color pins put in different streets in Ohio, so they could determine what message to send to what folks. It was an incredibly difficult, hand-fed process, but it was successful. What's happening right now is some of the more innovative infographics companies have figured out that what they really need to do is stream data into graphics and place it on a mapping technology. Let me show you one of those. Jerry, would you click on the one that says Los Angeles data? Mm-hmm. This is there's several of them. This is my favorite. I have no affiliation with this company, by the way. It's a company called Moonshadow. They're up in Eugene, Oregon. And what you're seeing right here is that these graphics are streaming income, ethnic, and location-based data in real time. So if you want to plan something and want to know more about saying, who do I give a message to in this neighborhood, this zip code, this voting district? Who do I give that message to, and how do I know it resonates with them? And so this is the nature of the research that's being done today. Now this is a very simple graphic. Your graphic can be anything and can be put anywhere, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that in a second. Jerry Lynn, would you go to the one to California data now? Now, one of the things they've done, they have a new tool that they've just done with, as you interview somebody, as you ask them questions, and as you say to me, you're most interested in trade, for example, that information is input into your streaming database in real time. So this doesn't have to be pre-produced. It can be entirely real time. Now, what we know about how information impacts people is the more immediacy, the more likely you're able to get an emotional impact, as long as I'm talking about something that actually concerns you. And so this immediacy becomes critically important. I'll give you a quick example. How many of you live in California? Remember when we had the ballot initiative from 6 years ago about whether or not GMO food products had to be disclosed on labeling? Remember that? And so when that ballot initiative first came online, 82% in the polls said, yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, why not? We tell you if it's got sugar or whatever in it, why not tell you if it's got GMO stuff in it? And then Monsanto and Cargill came in and they dumped $36 million into the no campaign. And they were extraordinarily successful. It lost. The no got 56% of the vote. It lost. And so there's a political consulting firm that I'm affiliated with once in a while. And so they said, what's the reaction going to be? And they said, well, the next thing we need to do is that for the next election cycle, clearly we need to raise $36 million, you know, so that we can fight these guys. It's just not fair. They had all the money, we didn't have any money. And I said, why don't we raise a couple $100,000 instead? And everybody went, what will we do with a couple $100,000? And I said, well, I know you guys haven't heard of augmented reality yet, but I can walk down the supermarket aisle at Safeway, recognize the Cheerios box, link in real time to the FDA database, and it will tell me. I can have a big red deal with a line through it. It will tell me there's GMO products and GMO foods in that product. If you have a database, you can foment change. And what's interesting about AR, and the next step that needs to be taken here, is this data needs to be put in your hand in your backyard so that you have emotional familiarity with the background plane. And once you do that, you've closed the loop on advocacy and on how people make up their minds. So we now have the ability, I mean, I go to a lot of this stuff and people talk about big data. What's interesting to me about big data isn't that you can generate a 900-page research report, which was just done, by the way, by a big consulting firm, but that you can actually use it to drive graphics. So the creative side is this graphic, and where do you put it? Your data is driving your graphic is driving the way people make up their minds. So it's kind of a very exciting world we're looking at right now. I realize that there's an awful lot of talk. I mean, Jimmy and I have been together many times, and a lot of excitement about presence and virtual reality, and there should be. That's a different kind of media type. But when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to the kind of stuff I'm interested in, imagine you could take your phone, walk over to the beach before your kids dip their toes in the water. You're in San Diego, California. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful beach. It's the most polluted ocean water in the entire country. But they don't want you to know about that. That's a big tourism business. Imagine you just pointed your phone where you were standing. You just pointed at the ocean, and it knows where you are, and it accesses the current water quality database so that you know in real time before your kid dips their toe in that water, in that creek, in that pool. You know in real time the quality of the water before. That is a more effective advocacy campaign for clean water than you have by having television spots, marches, parades, what have you. So this is now, from my point of view, I wish I was younger, because this is an exciting world of trying to figure out how to change things.
Thank you, Gary. So we have a few questions for the panel, and then we'll open it up to the audience as well. Let's start with, we're talking about that sort of emotional impact of these immersive technologies. And Laurie, do you want to start with that and tell us a little bit about, what is that emotional impact?
Yeah, I think, so the whole reason, and I probably should have said this a little earlier, that Project Empathy was created was, I think Van Jones and Jamie had the idea that they were going to pair the most advanced technology in storytelling possible with some of our most pressing social justice issues in the United States. That was the concept. How can we take things that are really broken and put them together with super bleeding edge technology and see where that goes? And I think the idea there was, and the reason VR was chosen was, as you could tell, and I think the trailer tries to get to this, the news knows, different people across the aisle in politics, they know that mass incarceration is a problem. We know that prisons are broken. We know that corporate prisons are, a true violation of the way we should be running things in the United States. And, the whole point, and you may have noticed this from the trailer or otherwise, was to come at people in a different way. And I think the idea is to come, to them through the heart. I think that we can intellectualize and think about things all we want, but there's a factoid that Linda dropped that I thought is exactly it. Is people are caring less about facts, which I don't think is a great thing, but it's about how they feel about things. And I think what we were aiming to do with these 4 different stories was to make people feel, what if it was you? And that is the impact of VR. When you can walk in someone else's shoes, maybe you can have a deeper understanding as to what it's really like.
And let's go to that factoid, Linda. What are your thoughts there as far as the emotional impact of
It's
immersive
interesting
technologies?
that my most recent research is about viewing a crisis in VR. And my preliminary findings are showing that the emotional impact of that was not just positive emotion. The research is showing that people do feel social connection, they can feel empathy, which is fairly well documented in the VR experience, but they equally shared their grief, their sadness, and their anger. So if you have a highly emotional experience, whether it's considered positive or negative, understanding those are subjective terms, that it impacts memory and decision making. So that's what Gary was talking about, that if it is highly emotional, yes, your decision making is going to be affected, as well as your memory encoding and your short and long-term memory. So these are big items, and being in a VR experience is highly engaging, highly emotional. And now we have to say is, where does that go with behavioral change? And that's what I'm researching as well.
How many people happen to see The Guardian, the newspaper in Britain, put out a virtual reality experience called 6x9? Did anyone see that? It was about solitary confinement. And I was just to say about the different feelings people can feel. In doing it, for me, being that they're putting you in solitary confinement, what it literally feels like to be in a 6x9 cell, I felt very uncomfortable. I wanted to pull the VR headset off my face as soon as possible, because you realize how claustrophobic that must feel over time. Mm-hmm. So, but that was their point. Mm-hmm.
So Gary, what you want to speak to those strengths and weaknesses of augmented and virtual reality and immersive media as far as is the social advocacy then?
Well, I think the people that are working in VR have a bigger challenge in a lot of ways. You have to have a very strong editorial hand. You have to have a situation to really pick and choose very, very carefully, because you can't do everything. And it's like Laurie was saying, that not only did they want to look at the incarceration rates, but you had to narrow that down too, and trying to figure out which issues, which stories you want to tell would generate the most emotion. It's easy to get an emotional reaction to being able to experience things that you don't normally do. For example, if you go to WorldViz and they try to make you step off the plank kind of thing, and you step off and fall 40 feet. I didn't like that part, you kind of go, I don't want to, in my normal day, I stay on planks as best I can. But we know that you can do that. We know you can lock somebody in a box and change all their physiological reactions to the environment they're currently in. We know we can do all those kinds of things. And so the producer of VR has to be a bit careful about how they go about doing that. The entertainment companies are particularly bad about being careful when they start doing these kinds of things. And I think that they're going to have to take a great deal more care. Augmented reality is a little bit different, in that think of the two differences. If you said I have exactly the same graphic, I'm going to put one in VR environment and the other in an AR environment, how do I make up my mind? And for me, which benefits from real-time data? If there's one that benefits from real-time data, it's an AR solution in my mind. If there's one that's going to more likely be pre-produced data, then it's probably a VR experience that'll make the greatest amount of difference.
Does anyone else? Yeah.
I don't know. I've experienced both, and I think it's the manipulation. And I don't know yet from a UI point of view, from a VR and an AR, as I'm looking at that data and I want to slice and dice it, it may be that I have a better facility in something that's created, or be able to stick things on virtual walls. In other words, if I'm now looking at big data and I see something, I might want to take that, virtually grab it, stick it somewhere, look at that, put it there. In other words, the world around me isn't augmenting that. So when I think of AR, I'm thinking of that data blended in some fashion with the real world. So if I'm looking at abstract data, and I want to be able to, it's the same way as if you and I were in there together, it's just you and I, now it's just me and the data. Yeah. And I can make the world go away, and I can focus on what I need to focus on. So that's where it gets interesting for me, and I don't know yet. It depends on what I'm looking at.
I mean, in a lot of ways, we're saying the same thing. So in my example of the water quality data, just having that water quality data on a device, and you said, here, read these 9,000 pages of water quality data when you have some time, okay, and get back to me. That's not the same thing as walking over to the beach and pointing your phone at it. Right. That's where AR sings, not necessarily.
And what's interesting too is, I'm sorry, Jerry. What's interesting too is what Jimmy was talking about, being in a virtual environment, creating solutions that you now bring to the real world. That's opposite of what has been done up until now. That's what I think is the shift that is really worth taking a second look at. Yeah.
And Josephine?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think when you think about AR and VR, you want to think about the storytelling part of it, and what makes it easier to communicate to a mass group of people. I think augmented reality, in the sense that everybody has their phone on them. You know, right now, access to VR headset, not everybody can go out there and buy the VR headset, and so there's that impact where if you have a story to tell in VR, there's very few people who get to learn that message, and then you get to miss out on that storytelling. Whereas with AR, and I'll give an example of a media company that had reached out to us. They actually are trying to find a different way to engage with millennials in terms of the news, because obviously we know millennials are not reading newspapers, they're barely paying attention to TV, but they're focused on their phone. And their idea is that they want to tell stories at the actual locations where these stories happened. So you can go to a place in time, a place anywhere in the world, open up your phone, and you can see a news story that happened right there and then. That can capture a whole mass of people as compared to being in that field of view of the VR headset. So just something to think about there.
So, and I think, Jimmy, that relates a little bit to what you're looking at when you're trying to, you know, have VR be more social and all. I mean, the idea of that headset and having all that, do you want to speak to? Do you think we're going to move in that direction?
I mean, we saw what happened as I was going through this with the challenges of having something that large, something, you know, that is taking that much room. The technology continues to change. So we've been working at when we first started doing this work, the headsets were $30,000 and they were, you know, expensive. Now they're, you know, $399, you know, with the controllers. That's continuing to go down. So the social interaction may get to the point where we're talking about the Geordie type of lens this way, or even contacts, which would make that social interaction or being able to see through them when I want to, or black them out when I want to, that's coming. So right now we're still in the early stages, and I don't know where that mixed would be. But I think that what we're working on now, what I think everybody hopefully is doing, is building content that will then bridge as the hardware moves forward. I don't have to create it yet again, to make use of it. And that's the things that I'd be looking for, and whatever you're looking for a platform is, you know, can you take your stuff and move it forward?
I think globally that we're still seeing that the cell phone is something that people have more access to than any other type of personal technology device. So it makes sense where Josephine's talking about now and where we can grow into. I'd like to actually open up to the audience, because I know you have tons of questions. Go ahead.
A couple quick questions, if I may. The first to Mrs. Burnell. What about things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy? Has anything been developed where I don't have to go drive down to a building and pay a psychiatrist, and where I can put on the headset and maybe to a greater degree have my brain chemistry
explode? Yeah. Actually, that's a really interesting question, and that is being addressed quite a bit in the medical industry, because right now they feel that the most effective applications are in VR for a variety of therapeutic uses. But they stress that you should have a clinician present. So if you're working in phobias and you go into an environment and you do, you know, the cognitive behavioral therapy, and, you know, you've got a clinician there that can either walk you through it, understands what's going there, provides more stimulus in your virtual environment, depending on how you're reacting to it and responding to it, right? Now, that is ideal because they're having great success with that. However, their concern is that all of a sudden people are going to start putting apps out there that saying, hey, I got an app here, you know, sign up for this, that'll take away your phobia. No clinician is present, no research is behind it, and yet will it work? Perhaps. Will it not? Most likely. And does that change everybody's perspective, and does it set the whole clinical therapeutic use for VR behind? And that's their fear at this point. So I can't say that would it be effective, maybe for some, but I still think you would probably go through a clinician's. And at the Stanford conference, there were psychiatrists from all over the world, and half of them that I talked with about were saying, it's part of my practice. And they can't bill it with insurance yet, of course, but they just say it's just a tool, like maybe Sandtray or something else that they have. It's just a tool. And they use it for those, those clients that can use it. It's an effective tool. Now, the other half that I spoke with were saying, I don't know anything about this. I need to know this because I can't move my clients forward. I'm having a very difficult time. And one thing that I thought was really interesting on the outcome of that was this whole idea of the neuroscience of body memory. Giuseppe Riva is doing research in Italy on the neuroscience of that he says when you're in a VR experience, you're altering your experience of being in your body. So in a way, your body says there's no body, right? So the subject is no longer in their body, so there's no body pain. So they're looking at it for pain management in that way as well, because your brain can't distinguish between real and virtual. So if that's the case, when you're here, when Jimmy was in that, his body's like, I don't feel this because that's not my body any longer. I'm not there. So the whole embodiment issue is coming into play in the therapeutic environment that I think holds tremendous promise. It's a long answer to your question, but
yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would, if I may, just for people who are interested in feeding that industry from a content point of view, what's interesting is the people from a practice point of view who want to use that type of tool aren't always the people who can create it. Right. And that's a big
And that's why we
challenge.
need that collaboration.
That's where it's really interesting.
Exactly.
So someone who can help, not just the gaming person who's now doing this kind of thing, but somebody who's got that vertical knowledge is really important, because I can sell the stuff into into a medical facility, but they say, okay, now what do I do with it? How do I make use? How do I tweak it?
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, and as a follow-up to this, what about the sort of accidental impact of VR? If deliberative VR experiences designed for cognitive behavior therapy are rewiring your brains, what's happening when you're playing a game, when you're in a solitary confinement, when you're in something that's may also be rewiring your brain, but it's not designed to do a specific thing?
Yeah, they were talking quite a bit about that in terms of where's everyone's baseline. Most of the time, people don't even know what your baseline is, so you can go into an experience and have a complete adverse effect and not understand why. And others can benefit from it. We just don't know where our psychological baseline is. And that's where the therapeutic, the relationship with the clinician is important, so they can help assess that. And they do use VR quite a bit for assessment as well.
One of our recent graduates, a guy's name's Matt Price, did his dissertation on trying to put together, recognizing that our baselines are different. It's almost like going and renting a movie and seeing that it's R, and so you get rid of your kids, or vice versa. But so he wants to put together a rating system based on me and you, on sort of what our reaction is within a VR environment, where some programming is more appropriate for some of us than it is for others. And I think that's probably gets to your point. Everything can be misused. I mean, every media has been misused in a million different kinds of ways. There may be greater danger here for the outcome of misuse, and the whole industry is paying a lot of attention to that.
Go ahead.
I'm so excited to hear what you're saying. I don't know where else I would get this kind of input. I was just told I want to do a video for what I do, and I am changing the world. You said you need to find what your one thing is. I found it, but I have not. I wanted to do a video on the process. Here's why this is the right process. And I was told, no, you have to get into the emotional. What was step one? What is this 4 steps that you quoted, and who's rocking those 4 steps that I might go learn
Yeah, I can talk to you. We'll discuss it afterwards. I'll give you more information on that. Yeah. Yeah, but you know, it's interesting too that when you're looking at behavioral change, one of the things that in clinical, and again, I'm not a clinician, so I might be muddling this a little bit, but one of the things that I thought was interesting is when somebody hears voices, right? And so they go to a psychiatrist and they're trying to say, okay, you know, help me manage the voices because they're interfering with my life. And they said that one of the findings they just found was that when you're in a VR environment, when people that, you know, have those issues, they cannot and they will not ever hear the voices that are present outside the VR experience. So they don't understand what that mechanism is. But now they're actually saying, well, let's make the voices have a presence inside the VR experience so they can have a relationship, a physical relationship with the voice that's controlling their life and say, no, I don't think I'm going to listen to you today, or you're a bully, I don't like that. And they can actually learn to moderate the voices in their head. But what they're finding is unless they create something that has an image of the voices do not happen in a VR experience. And they're not sure why. So understanding that all the stuff that we're talking about, we don't know. But the exciting part is we're on the cutting edge. We're asking the right questions. We're going in the right direction. We're all in this together going, we really don't know, but it looks promising. But with all promise, there's peril, you know, so we're trying to get out in front of it and address it best we can with the right questions, but yeah.
So I just want to make sure, definitely you, but I want to make sure I'm not missing somebody in the back that I haven't seen. So we'll come back to you in a minute.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So my question is, I'm all for the emotional impact, especially for social change and justice, but where's the call to action and how do you garner that emotional impact and get it to be and accomplish something other than feelings?
Yeah,
so I just want to make sure that I'm paraphrasing correctly. How can you garner that social impact?
Yeah,
Okay.
Specifically, I'll answer that. Because with Project Empathy, the idea was, and the reason it was originally called Day of Empathy was to specifically take it to key politicians and policymakers who do make decisions about the way the U.S. prison system is run. So we did put Cory Booker in a headset, and we did put Newt Gingrich in a headset, and I think we would have taken it even further. You know, I think the idea was, who are the key players, who's making decisions, and get them to feel something from it. It wasn't it wasn't only intended as a mass audience tool to just feel bad about this issue. It was specifically and politically, there was a lot of political savvy with this to get key players in government to, if not intellectualize that there's problems with the U.S. prison system, but to feel the problems. And that was the intent, to get it to people who do make those final decisions, you know, whether it was about corporate prisons or whether it was the way that our government-run prisons are functioning. So
I think that getting back to political campaigns for just a second, the key is to get out your vote, more so than anything else you could possibly do. And the only way you get out the vote is sort of the opposite of what you just asked. People are emotionally invested in certain topics. Mm-hmm. Who are those people and what are those topics? You know, so if I want you to vote, and I'm pretty sure how you might vote if I could just get you to the polls, then I wanted to know which of those topic buttons I need to push to get you to leave your house and go do something. Rather than trying to convince you that I have something that's so important that you'll be emotionally invested in it and then do something. The odds of success there are far, far less.
I think we had a question over here. Yeah. Thank you.
I was wondering what you guys thought about mixed reality, AR, VR mixed, and what perhaps could be, like the Microsoft HoloLens, what could be the applications of that?
So the question is applications of mixed reality and specifically Microsoft HoloLens.
Well, I can talk to both the HoloLens and other. As you start getting the accuracy of what you're seeing and getting to real life, what we see are the industrial applications of someone being able to go and put someone through. As an example, we had somebody came in that was teaching someone how to mix paint in a factory. And they just created these little 2x4 structures that in essence, were the placement for the machine, but they had articulated all the knobs in real life, so that when you turned it in real life, it turned inside virtual. So they could see, they could feel these things, so you had that haptic response of actually doing something. Internally, they saw the paint coming through and mixing to the appropriate place, and that mixed, really, if you're really thinking about VR and immersion being an experience, adding that other sense, and we didn't really talk about that, but the tactical side of MR is a big thing. You know, I mean, we haven't even talked about smell-o-vision inside VR at this point. But yeah, definitely in industrial applications, you see it.
It's also happening in the use case that we're doing with Univision, where, you know, we had talked about kind of the behaviors that people are taking. So what's happening is they're getting 3 different kind of offers, and we're trying to watch what behavior people are going to take and what kind of decision they're going to make on the offer. And then when we roll this out nationally, they're going to get a headset, because some sponsors might want them to experience a 360 video based on the decision that they made in the augmented reality experience. So that's another use case that's more of a, not industrial, but more social in a sense, yeah.
Back in the back?
How do you make some social changes in places where they don't have like all these technologies? Maybe just simple phones, where people are using just phones, and how do you make changes, social changes?
So I think what you're asking here is, you know, the different levels of immersion tools, and we know that globally they don't have necessarily as sophisticated technology in some areas as others, and how can you still create social change? And I think Gary's got a perfect example of how that's been used with some very simple tools.
Yeah, 2 actually. There's a foundation called the Minobi Foundation, and the Minobi Foundation's goal in life is to try and improve the economic well-being of rural farmers in Africa. And so what they found out was that the rural farmer was, so if we go to the supermarket down here somewhere, you know, and buy a pound of tomatoes and it costs us $1, you can be pretty sure that the farmer that raised that got about 50 cents. And in environments that are less efficient in terms of transportation and storage of food and stuff, so let's say Mexico, even there the farmer got about 35 cents. In Africa, they were getting 8 cents. And the reason they were getting 8 cents is because they relied on the middleman to get their product to market, and the middleman was screwing them. So the middleman, by and large, was somebody with a big truck. And so what the Minobi Foundation did was, rather than trying to petition government, they put people in the local markets, so actual people in the local markets. And then with a simple app on the phone, in this case it was text because smartphones hadn't become ubiquitous yet. With that simple piece of information, I'm the farmer, I've got tomatoes, the middleman cruises through with his truck, and I can look up in real time and see what tomatoes are selling for in the 5 markets closest to my farm. This simple application doubled the income of the rural farmers in Senegal in the areas where it was used. Doubled it in a 14-month period of time. Nowadays, because of smartphones and the first generation of smartphones are so cheap now, the phone people that manufacture them give them away, particularly in places like Africa. And so now you can just walk over to your tomatoes and just point your camera function at it, or your zucchini or whatever, and it shows you in real time what that pricing is right now. That's an example of how do you use the, you know, the lower level technology. But the migration of new technology is very, very, very fast. You know, and one of the assumptions that people make, and it's really, I always think it's amusing that we need to ask ourselves some questions. I was in a meeting, and it was about a political issue in California. It largely impacted the Latino population. And then one of the consultants in the meeting said, well, as you know, Latino families don't have access to the internet. And we all just sort of went along talking, you know, and it was about an hour later when somebody said, wait a minute, do we actually know that? And the real answer was there's a greater percentage of Latino families with access to the internet than there is non-Latino families. So the assumptions we make about technology become really important, you know, and so it's, I mean, there are a lot of ways to skin a cat. I would say when we look at advocacy issues, the worst thing we want to do is start with the technology we have in mind. Because it may be our issue lends itself to VR or to AR, or to mixed reality or to video or to a good documentary. We want to start with the issue we're trying to impact and worry about the technology later.
So I think we have time for just one or two last quick questions, all the way in the back. You're going to have to come just a little bit closer or get close to a mic.
How would you approach approaching a hospital or a facility that works with people who are ill, either mentally ill or even physical, like a chronic illness or terminal illness? How would you guys go and pitch VR, AR project?
So what I'm hearing from you right now is that you're asking about how would you go into the medical field, whether it's hospital, institution, et cetera, to sort of tell them about the benefits of augmented and virtual reality and immersive technology. Well, I am a psychologist. The first thing I would go, and I'm a researcher, the first thing I would do is go in armed with the research studies that we do have. And much like Linda talked about, there are some conferences, it's starting to become, they're realizing the potential, just beginning to realize the potential. Now, what would be amazing is if you could collaborate with someone, you know, like Jimmy, where they're building technology, and then you're collaborating with psychologists or other, people in the clinical profession, where you can have a whole team with that type of thing. But it is, I'm on a grant right now, helping a group write a grant for a pediatric psychology out in Maryland, and they want to use a virtual reality device for phobia. So phobia treatment probably is the #1 area, but that's certainly.
If you go to the Foundation Center, and the Foundation Center is an inventory of there are 32,000 family foundations in the United States with assets of $50 million or more. And so go to the Foundation Center, take the database and research the foundations, starting within the county where you live, and find family foundations with significant assets that are interested in children's health or whatever health you're looking at, and then have them not only fund you, but help you get to the institutions you want to get to, is the way I would approach it.
And there's one other thing.
So we just actually have 1 minute left, so I want to do a quick boom, 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 boom takeaway, and then I wanted to let you know that we'll be outside immediately, and then we're going to go over to the expo hall, and we'll be at the Fielding Graduate University booth, and we'd love to have answer the questions that are unanswered and have some deeper conversations about it. But Jimmy, starting with you, do we have any takeaways?
Takeaway for me is it's going to be interesting right now. I'm working with 3 or 4 different things. If we were all in the same virtual room at the same time, my biggest challenge right now is how do I manifest that? How do I go and get 100 people into 10 by 10 space, or et cetera? That's my biggest challenge right now, is when we all want to be in, how can we all be in at the same time?
Thank you.
I'd say, with everything happening, be comfortable with change. Find a way to be comfortable with change, because that's the #1 thing going on here. Our lives are changing rapidly, and find a way to either harness it, use it, or just be comfortable with it.
Laurie?
I would say don't be afraid of new technologies to tell really hard stories, and just know harnessing the technology and also telling the story are going to be equally hard parts, but it's worth it.
And Josephine?
As a marketer, I would say think about the target audience, but then also think about who's connected to that target audience. Just to follow up on your question in terms of pitching a hospital, even though you're thinking about the people who are ill, you want to think about the family as well. They're typically forgotten when it comes to mental health and when it comes to chronic pain, and they are the ones taking care of these people. So think about experiences that they can have in the hospital as well, in terms of educating them on what's happening using this kind of technology.
And Gary?
It's a couple of us in this room I just recognized. We were at 9 years ago, American Film Institute, put a small invitation-only thing together about this new thing called augmented reality. And it was 9 years ago. And you had to have glyphs, and you had to have a room full of software people, and nobody knew what to do and all that stuff. And it's now 9 years later, but the new iPhone has AR, is ubiquitous. Same thing with the new Google devices, the same thing with the new Samsung devices. This is now something that's begging to be used in innovative ways. And so I think that if you're a producer, if you're a designer, if you're a developer, when you look at this cusp of new media and when to play, this is like the perfect time to be a player in that stuff. I founded one of the first interactive entertainment companies in the country long time ago. And we did really well because we were first in multimedia. So some of the products we made sold very well, partly because people go, wow, that's really amazing. But the amazing thing was there weren't any other products. They go, you have the #2 selling product in the country. I go, we only sold 4,000 units. Yeah, I know, but still, it's #2, you know. We're right there now. We're right there now with AR and with VR as well. So this is the time.
Thank you, everybody. Again, love to be able to speak to you outside or then over in the expo hall. Thank you.